Good evening. The speaker for today's session is architect Diwakar Chintala. Architect Diwakar has over 26 years of experience in a range of complex building types including high-rise, commercial, institutional, residential and low-cost housing in the United States, China, Middle East and India. He completed his Masters of Architecture in Urban Design and Environment Behavior and Place Studies from Kansas State University, Manhattan, Kansas, from 1988 to 1993, and his Bachelor's of Architecture from School of Planning and Architecture, Jawaharlal Nehru Technological University, Hyderabad. He spent over 20 years working at large firms in the US, including 8 years at the SOM San Francisco office and then 7 years at the Gensler San Francisco. He is also a lead accredited professional. Diwakar moved to India to help set up Gensler's India office and led the practice as design director till 2016, when he set up his own studio in Bangalore, Studio Chintala. His design process at Studio Chintala involves challenging preconceived notions about buildings and typologies and starting with a clean slate. The studio operates with the philosophy that design is problem solving, the process of finding the simplest and most logical solutions. Beauty is the byproduct of inherent simplicity and honesty of the design. Every project is an opportunity to develop concepts based on logic, context, and aspirations of the user. Style and aesthetics are purely a consequence of this creative process. From designing high-rise buildings such as the second tallest building in the world to developing the $1,500 house, his work has acknowledged and impacted the building environment on human behavior, often offering a minimalist approach to design. Diwakar's work spans for designs for several products, a furniture line, graphic design, video documentaries, and user experience. Some of the projects that he's worked on are at the Coleman Highline Technology Campus, San Jose, California, Pranam Hospitals, Bangalore, Tangban Waterfront and Urban Design, Hyderabad, Hindu Vedic Monastery Temple and Meditation Center, San Jose, Centennial Towers, South San Francisco, California, JPMC Office Building, Hyderabad, Ben Gurion International Airport, Israel, and his most recent project is the T-Works Hyderabad, a prestigious initiative by the Telangana government. The moderator for today's session is Professor Kamini Singh. Professor Kamini Singh is principal at SV College of Architecture, High-Tech City, Hyderabad. She holds a bachelor's degree from SPA, Jnafau and master's in housing from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. She has over 23 years of experience in academics and practice. Under her leadership, SV College of Architecture was conferred with Times Excellence Award under the Best Private Colleges in Hyderabad in the year 2020. She has been a guest faculty at various institutes such as NICMAR and NIFT. Her areas of interest on which she has written and presented research papers include urban planning and housing. She is a member of board at studies at JNFAU and Technical Advisory Committee at ICMR-NIN. She is also the director in the firm ARCA, Integrated Project Management, along with her husband, architect Kuldeep Singh. The firm ARCA Integrated Project Management Solutions is a project management consultancy firm providing project management and construction management services to various MNCs, corporates, real estate clients across major cities in India and GCC region. For the last 4 consecutive years, ARCA IPMS has been recognized at national level for PMC services. Her consultancy firm, ARCA IPMS, was featured amongst the 20 most promising project management consultancy firms in India for the year 2018 by Silicon India, a special survey edition on project management consultants. ARCA IPMS has been recognized as the 10 most prominent consultants to watch in 2019 by Prime View Business Analysis. ARCA is also awarded the 20 most innovative brands by Business Connect in 2020. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. To start off, architecture, as we all know, is a blend of sentiment, aptitude, aesthetics, art, physics that extends beyond the physical form. Every designer has got a unique perspective on a given brief, and we have had some renowned designers who have developed their own architectural language over a period of time. The art of designing is a mirror of one's morality, ethics, skills, sentimental values. There is no perfect condition of the design process, and it is subjective to the architect and the project. However, we have also seen that one of the fundamental and crucial phases of design is its approach and the design process. In today's discussion, we might refer to a few famous architects who have influenced the society with their innovative design concepts and who serve as role models for young aspiring architects. Today, we shall address and discuss the professional development and work culture that architect Diwakar Chintala practices as we go through the slideshows exhibiting projects completed by him. He will be describing the design process and his design philosophy. I hope that today's presentation will be an insightful one that highlights architect Diwakar's work, and there will be some nice peer interaction towards the end, which will be, after the presentation is done. And today's discussion centers around three fundamental approaches of design: the intent, honesty, and simplicity. I'm reminded of what Leonardo da Vinci had said, that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. It requires tremendous thought and work to be simple. In fact, making something appear effortless and organized, lyrical is difficult. It is not easy to beautifully enclose the space. The composition has to be exactly right, the right amount of material, color, and the right amount of everything. Everything has to fit in place. Simplicity, in fact, in design, it calms us and also inspires us. For instance, we have seen, architect, we have seen how Frank Lloyd Wright dedicated himself to creating livable and compassionate environments. He gave close consideration to the aesthetics of the building, how it would interact with and benefit the occupants. Architecture has also a close relationship to the settings according to his organic design ethos. He established a pattern which is still used today by displaying the materials like wood and stone in their natural state, displaying honesty in design as opposed to shaping them into something new. So he valued the material in its natural form, not forgetting his famous The Falling Water, which is an example of the organic architecture that he propagated. He advocates for simplicity, necessity, and open disclosure of the materials, actual features, as they relate to the intended purpose. His decoration also was influenced by nature. On the other hand, while we watch this phenomenon that goes beyond our past experiences, for example, in the UAE, where there are no boundaries, the territory is defined by artificial forms, the coast is remodeled using figures and simple representations, high-end bizarre skyscrapers that demand a lot of financial resources and technological prowess. Over a period of time, what we have seen is with new techniques, deception in architecture have also become prevalent. We have had, there are some architects on the other side of the spectrum where we have seen architecture move towards extreme evolution, adopting unusual shapes, heights, the orthogonal grids, concentric patterns, use of parametric design, complex forms of buildings, and using sometimes, even complex softwares, which not everybody would be familiar with at times. For instance, I'm reminded of, for her, nothing was 90 degrees. Zaha Hadid, who was known as a revolutionary architect, noted for her avant-garde designs that push the boundaries of modern architecture, who is oftenly referred to as the founder of the 89 degrees. She had said that there are 360 degrees, so why stick to one? Deconstructive architecture, as is known, substitutes the traditional architectural notions with fluid forms. She approached complex designs with deception, since in some cases, we cannot even determine the building's function from its appearance. To some, this could be interesting, and there could be an element of surprise and wonder. Now, in your case, Architect Diwakar, you have always propagated and advocated simplicity. How do you think that architectural simplicity can influence the perceived value of space from the user's perspective? While you are advocating simplicity and honesty in design, what have been your intentions?
So I think, thanks, Kamini. Thanks for the introduction. And I see some really amazing people here in the audience. So I really want to thank everybody for the opportunity to have a dialogue today. And I really think of this as a dialogue. And obviously, I have teachers here in the audience and I have colleagues. And so by no means, these are purely this is sort of our studio's journey, some of my own journey, and then some of our explorations and where we've come today in our practice. So with that, yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think, we're constantly searching, and we're searching for, I mean, when you start a studio, you start by asking, what is it that we are trying to achieve here, and what are we trying to, what's our mandate? And actually, one of our architects, she's one of our senior designers, when we first started the studio in 2016, asked me, so every studio, every architecture firm, every design firm has a mandate. What is ours? And funnily enough, I didn't have an answer. This was 2016. But I did say that we will very soon have an answer. And fast forward to a couple of years, the answer became extremely clear. I am answering your question in a very convoluted way, but please indulge me. So essentially, when we talked about designing buildings, designing furniture, designing graphics, designing urban spaces, we're always trying to make things timeless, beautiful, functional, durable, economical. And so we said, okay, these are all the attributes of what good design constitutes. But at the end of the day, how do you ensure that beauty, functionality are always assured? And so we started exploring different ideas, and you realize that beauty is obviously subjective. And what is beautiful to you may not be beautiful to someone else. So we said, how do you find something that's timeless and something that's beautiful universally? And you look at the spectrum of the work that's you see around, and you see a wide range of notions of beauty and wide range of focuses, as you can see in practices. And we said, finally what we realized was, if I may start sharing my screen at this point. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's seen.
Yeah. So we said, we're trying to kind of create good design. We're trying to create beautiful spaces. And so we said, what is fundamental to design, and what is fundamental to beauty? And as I think the person introducing us talked about, this is really what we came up to. We said design for us is problem solving. It's the process of finding the simplest and most logical solutions. Beauty is merely a byproduct of the inherent simplicity and honesty of the design. So the entire conversation today, I think, would be sort of revolving around this idea, because we feel very strongly, and this, as it were, turned out to be our manifesto, our vision, whatever you call it, our philosophy, really. So we started approaching design, very much like engineers, actually, very, very much in a form follows function standpoint. We said, can we remove the architect? Can we remove the ego? Can we remove the designer? And can we then solve the problem that's at hand? Now, I'm not trying to suggest that every project we do has a problem, because problem has a negative connotation, but essentially there is a brief, and if we are trying to solve the brief, that becomes the problem. So can we dispassionately set ourselves aside and solve the problem? And when you do that, oftentimes in our experience, the project or the design that comes out, evolves from that process, is beautiful. I mean, again, beauty is very subjective, but we believe that it's beautiful not just in a visual sense, but in an in a sense that its intentions are very beautiful. So let me explain what that means. So eventually, and like you mentioned, I think it all comes down to intentions, because skills are different, talent is different, tools are different. Everybody has their own perceptions of beauty. What really is endearing and what really is timeless, I think, is the intentions that you work with. And so we said, what are those intentions and what is that beauty? And we said, okay, let's ask a little girl or a little boy or a child to draw a car and or anything else, right? In this case, it was a car. And what they draw is definitely not the most proportionate, not the most perfect scale, not very well articulated. But what is really remarkable about it is there's something beautiful about it, right? There is something real about it, something authentic about it. And if you were to further look at this, you realize that it comes from a space of honesty. The child is not consumed by making it beautiful. The child is not trying to win. The child is not trying to make it beautiful. The child is not trying to win a competition. The child is merely trying to represent a car that was asked of her to be drawn. And there is something inherently beautiful about it. So we said what it comes down to is this notion of making something that's honest. There is no other intention except making something useful and functional and beautiful. And when you come from that space, inherently, there is a certain beauty that we think is timeless. So if you kind of take that approach and then look at, what some of the quote unquote popular, and you alluded to Zaha, God bless her soul, amazing architects. On the right is Frank Gehry. You can start wondering, what is the idea of beauty, and how do you kind of relate with that sense? And I believe that, of course, it's a very subjective thing. I believe that it really depends on how you look at it. But when we start talking about designing buildings, we actually start by looking up the dictionary, right? We say, when we are designing a hospital, we actually go to the dictionary and ask, what is a hospital? We try to erase our, kind of preconceived notions. We say, what is a hospital? And it's an institution providing medical and surgical treatment. So can we essentially solve the problem? Can we answer the definition? Can we really only serve the purpose without bringing ourselves into the picture? So for example, when we designed a bench in our own studio, we said, what is a bench? And it says a long seat for several people, typically made of wood or stone. So we said, if you were to just take that definition and dispassionately remove your sensibilities, remove yourself from that process, remove materiality, remove context, remove history, remove all of those things, and purely just solve the problem, purely try to create a bench that meets all the requirements, is durable, is timeless, is functional, is easy to build, is economical, is functional, without your own preconceived notion of beauty and your own preconceived notion of what a bench ought to be. The resultant, we believe, is maybe not the most stunning, but definitely enduring, and probably, is sort of universally acceptable. So that's been our experience. So what we do, and please stop me if you feel like I've already answered the question, but what our process is extremely simple. When we start a project, we are pretty much trying to list the attributes. So when we design an office building, we say, what makes a good office building, right? So obviously we have a client brief. Obviously we have our own learning and education and experiences. And we say, X, Y, Z, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If we were to meet all 10 aspects, what we call them attributes, then we've kind of solved the problem. So we list out all these attributes very dispassionately, without bringing our own prejudices, without bringing our own sensibilities, and purely answer the sort of the question. And then we go about designing this thing, and we go literally checking. We got natural light, great. We got easy connections, great. We got lease space, great. We got the cost, great. And then when we feel like we've hit all the attributes, just walk away, right? We walk away without really trying to be coercive, trying to be forceful, trying to be urgent about making it beautiful. And there is a lot of restraint. There is a lot of trust you need to have in the process when you say, okay, I'm going to walk away from this. And the resulting sort of design usually we think is beautiful. So with that, that's kind of where we are and how our process is.
Okay, honest enough answer, Diwakar. You have been associated with the Gensler team, the firm, for
Right.
quite some time, which is a global firm spread across 53, I think now 50 plus locations.
Right.
Right. And Art Gensler, from what we know, is known for the impact of his, not just his design, but he was an industry icon. He was an entrepreneur who had a vision for a collaborative workplace. Gensler is known for creating a single corporate culture that adheres to the we versus I. He believed in together we are one, the family culture, tapping the top talent, allowing people to pursue their passion, giving them, in fact, financial stake and equity in the business. That because he always believed that that is how he could weave the firm together. He didn't want to become a star architect, and he was known for his client-first approach, which means that the needs of the client are more important than imposing the architect's style on him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, the human experience framework was, found from his inside out approach to architecture, which always examined the user journey, which was very, very important for him. And in fact, he was responsible for completely defining the business of architecture in the United States. Each project of his was custom made to the demands of the client, like rightfully you also were just mentioned about it. Rather than focusing on any one signature style, he was recognized for helping clients comprehend the value of the profession, which is again very important, that clients recognize the value of the profession. And his well-known rubber band theory, what exactly it would be, I think you can throw more light on it, which would encourage designers to challenge clients without going too far and jeopardizing their confidence and all that. So how do you think this, you're working with Gensler for a long time, has exposed you to a variety of culture, and how has it facilitated you towards your professional development and your shaping up your design philosophy?
That's I think that was actually Gensler's my last employment. So right after I left Gensler, I started Studio Chintala. So it's definitely been a huge influence and huge sort of learning, really. So I worked at SOM, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, as most people know, the ones that literally wrote the book on the high-rise, super tall buildings, for 8 years. So interesting story, and I can I'll get into that, but I think it's important I answer the question. SOM is a very different firm where you're expected to show up in the morning, sit at your desk and shut up and deliver the goods. And you essentially know exactly where you fit into the equation, and you know exactly what sort of work you're expected to do. And they call it finishing school in the States. It's pretty much everybody that is serious about working on large scale projects aspires to work at SOM. They do iconic buildings, as you know. Some people work for a couple of years and move on. I managed to be there for 8 years, which really counts as 16 years because you work for 80 hours a week. But SOM is an entirely different place. And then from there, I went to Gensler, and essentially Gensler's a place where you have to be entrepreneurial. And you're right, Art Gensler's created this culture. The largest firm in the world by far, I think 58 offices and counting, over 5,500 employees globally. And so it's an entirely different culture. It took me a good 6 months to really come to terms with the work culture there. I was lost. I was lost for 6 months. I was just literally confused, and in fact contemplated leaving when it finally struck me. It's entirely different. At SOM, you didn't know what the fee was. You didn't know what who the client was. You were just asked to, do your job. Now, there's a beauty to that. I'm not being critical by any means. Gensler, on the other hand, expects you to know and be financially responsible for the project you're working on. You're fully exposed to the fee. You're able to ask the client a variety of questions. Client interaction is extremely important. And also, like you said, there is no one style. The idea of a constellation of stars, not just one star, but a constellation of stars. And Gensler views design as not a stylistic expression, not as one philosophy, but a multitude of philosophies. And so you'll find a wide range of styles, quote unquote, when you see the work that Gensler's been putting out for decades now. But suffice to say that Gensler literally created the typology of workplace design. They are the leaders in workplace design. They've created that vertical of workplace design, what is called a practice area, and they lead in that, but also created the idea of empowering employees. The culture is very much, like I said, entrepreneurial. You're expected to carry your own weight, but you're also expected to put your hand up and take responsibility. And that's exactly how I moved to India. When Gensler decided to open an office in India, I put my hand up and said, I would love to go. And the decision was made to move to Bangalore. And I moved to Bangalore to help set up Gensler's office. I'm going to quickly share a project we did from the Bangalore office in a town called Suzhou, which is on the screen. This project is slated to be the world's second tallest building. Long story, I'll spare you the details, but suffice to say that a series of different studios all over the Gensler ecosystem attempted to solve the problem here. This project is for the third richest guy in China. A very unique personality, a rags to riches. He was a construction worker and ended up being the third richest guy. But anyway, he wanted the bragging rights to say that he owned the tallest building in China. This building is 745 meters. It's called the Suzhou Tower. It's now changed. The names have changed. It's in a town called Suzhou, which is about 60 miles east of Shanghai. The idea was to create a tall building. He didn't care, about a lot of things, such as, some of the clients are obsessed about the fenestration, the detailing. He just wanted a tall building. So there it is. It's only second to Burj Khalifa. Burj is about 845 meters. This one is about 745 meters tall. And so we really were able to break in because there were multiple firms, as I said, or offices rather, Gensler's offices, that were trying to solve the idea of a podium. As you know, tall buildings have podiums typically that the towers sit on. We came, again, I mean, it's a long story, but there's multiple sort of people attempting to solve the problem. We solved it by separating the podium out and kind of defeating the whole notion of a podium and creating two buildings. The podium basically became a separate building, which is the building in the foreground. And the tower, of course, is and the podium in itself, or the retail building, as you can see, is a high rise in its own right, about 80 meters. And that kind of solved the problem. So we were asked to stay in China for a year and a half and work on this project. The other project, my last project in the States before I moved back, started in 2011, is HP's world headquarters. Again, in the spirit of Gensler, I was given complete sort of opportunity to interact with HP. This is in their iconic Palo Alto campus. The idea of, again, simplicity, the idea of keeping concepts extremely basic and simple. What it was is a glorified sort of executive briefing center, very formal, which is the blue for in this picture, and then punctuated by some informal spaces. And that was the basic party. And we created this building that essentially replicates that idea, which is trying to kind of be a very formal building, because it's where CEOs come, shake hands, and strike big deals. Essentially, but the real sort of business deals happen in the informal spaces. So we created this sort of tubes that were inserted, which actually house the informal spaces, where most of the sort of interaction happens on a casual level. So it kind of interfaced with the iconic HP campus. This is a courtyard that separates the two buildings, and this is actually one of those informal boxes that you saw in the diagram. So essentially, a space where HP showcases their latest technology, and like I said, it's by invitation only. Now contrast that with SOM. This is a speculative office building. I was leading the design. This was way back in 2005 or 4, actually. It's an office building. There was really no context to speak of. I mean, typically we do a lot of office buildings in downtown context, but here is a office building along a mountain. This is along Highway 101, going from San Francisco International Airport to the city of San Francisco. And since there was no context, and I mean, typically SOM's buildings are very rectilinear, very cubist, if you will. The only context we had was the highway and the mountains. And so we kind of responded to the dynamism of the highway. And essentially, long process of various options, but essentially what resonated really well with the client was this curvilinear shape. So we ended up with this. It's actually one of 2 buildings, the public spaces inside the building, the main lobby. From there, I take you to, again, another project I did at Gensler, sorry. This is the greenest tower, greenest office building. This is actually, we were going for net zero. We ended up being near zero. Every known strategy was thrown in. We said we threw the kitchen sink at it. Every passive strategy, every active strategy, double skin facade, stack effect, atria, geothermal, photovoltaics, of course, pretty much every imaginable, purely because the client was a bank and they wanted the bragging rights to say that we own the greenest office building in America. So different ideas for the double skin facade I was sketching. And then, of course, the eventual building is probably not the prettiest, but it purely responds to these kind of parameters that we threw at it. And so this is in Pittsburgh downtown. Another project, again, another super tall building, 250 meters plus. This is a project I did at SOM. This is in a town called Tianjin, which is east of Beijing. Again, the brief was to create this. Actually, the mayor of the town was really involved in this project more than the client. They were trying to define Tianjin as a viable alternate to Beijing for businesses. So they really wanted to attract new businesses. So the tower became iconic and representative of that aspiration. So what we were asked to design was a very, very articulated sort of tower that really became the emblem for their pursuit. So we came up with this really fluted sort of expression on the banks of a river, Huawei. The river sort of flows through the town and essentially created this building. But I think I would like to go back to some of your questions about intentions. And I think with the next few projects, I can talk about it, but please feel free to.
Diwakar, with respect to the tall buildings, obviously they require a different level of focus as well as a progressive thinking, for a futuristic vision. your initial conceptualization, what role does it have in the final design outcome? Especially, with respect to the vertical domain and in a crowded urban context, because these towers are all in the urban areas. And also, could you tell us what have been your priorities for the future of tall buildings, with changing emphasis to the social connections, the link with the urban fabric, construction of the vertical communities. You have been using a lot of double skin facades, for obvious reasons, that the advantages that it has, but how do you mitigate problems like, for example, the initial cost of construction, the space consumption, the maintenance demand, etc. And what if it fails to function if the context changes, for example, shading by any adjacent building which would come up later. So what happens in such cases? How do you exactly, resolve these problems?
So you're right. I mean, tall buildings are really all about what we call "look at me" architecture. They're all, it's sort of an American model, right? I mean, it's the power of capitalism. Every tall building in America, I dare say, almost, if not, I think every tall building has a connection with a commercial brand, a logo, right? There's either a bank. You would very well not even be a tenant in the building, but you would still be able to buy the rights to put your logo on the building. Essentially, what tall buildings are doing, and of course, they're solving the problem of space when in a highly dense area. But if you look at Manhattan, if you look at San Francisco, if you look at Dallas, Houston, LA, tall buildings are essentially markers. They're symbols of capitalism. They're trying to say, I'm here, I've arrived, I'm in Dallas, I'm in New York, I'm in San Francisco. And tall buildings are very much ego driven in that sense. They're really about, in my opinion, a capitalist force trying to identify themselves, create a footprint, show that they've arrived. To that effect, so tall buildings are very much about symbolism. As far as the future, I mean, I'm obviously can only speculate, but when you, I think cost somehow when you're doing a super tall building, costs are often when you're doing a double skin facade, you do very detailed analysis. I mean, none of these projects are designed purely because of their aesthetic value. I think that would be a gross sort of mistake if one were to think that. They are very robust in their financial equation. There is an ROI, return on investment. They do pretty thorough studies on the viability of a project such as this. Clearly, the lease rates, the investment, and then of course you throw in sustainability, like you were asking. You calculate the costs that are actually going to be saved in the services. For example, one of the largest expenditures in a building would be the air conditioning. How do you kind of bring economies into that? So every part of this is quite justified. I mean, based on lease rates, based on savings, based on so the cost of construction. I mean, each of these projects goes through some very rigorous exercises to justify every penny. None of these are to be sort of thought as just somebody's whim, although they are, but there's a very strong financial case to be made about those. So as far as India, I mean, obviously there are a lot of examples these days. Hyderabad's going pretty crazy with tall buildings. Mumbai has been always the leader. When there is both sort of a demand in terms of space, and when there is a demand for your ego, as it were, there will be taller buildings. And they will have to justify them from a cost standpoint, I think.
Right. You have followed the minimalist approach in your design, and this strategy, if I remember, it gained popularity after Mies van der Rohe promoted it, through his designs. and who's known as the father of minimalism. His designs were, in fact, an attempt to eliminate the visual noise and clutter by leaving the building itself as the main focus. And he wouldn't use too many shapes or forms. And colors that were used were also the neutrals and often used geometrical forms. He believed that architecture had very little to do with the invention of interesting forms, personal inclinations, or imitating the then very predominant Roman and the Renaissance styles, etc. His works also showcase simple geometries and which had extensive use of glass facades, not forgetting the Seagram building, which set up a new trend in the New York skyline. Now, achieving the maximum with the most minimal of forms was his focus. Minimalist architecture still has a lot to offer for popular architecture, where the less is more. However, you also have the maximalists who say that more is more, where the use of expensive materials, man-made substances, high-quality craftsmanship, bold geometrical forms, the display of splendor, they're all in opposition to minimalism. In opposition to minimalism is also a variety of styles, bold and vibrant colors, tones, play with textures, shapes, display of wealth and sophistication. uh, do you at any point of time attempt to combine both in order to satisfy the demands of your clients, who at times would appreciate opulence and adornment?
Yeah,
How do you strike this balance with your originality?
that's a very interesting question. In fact, I think, let me try to answer that. It's a really interesting question, and I think we've tackled it on a project. I don't know if it's in this presentation, but we'll see. It's actually a project in Hyderabad. But firstly, minimalism, I think it would be a gross sort of disservice to call minimalism a style. I think if we do, for the lack of a better word, refer to our work as minimalism, but I think it's less of a style and it's more of a philosophy. It's the idea of it's the same thing as a black and white photography, or black and white photograph rather, right? You can see a color photograph and a black and white photograph. The color photograph is vibrant, it's beautiful, it sends a message. The black and white photograph is less vibrant, it's beautiful, but it's very, very strong in its concept, because you are eliminating the quote unquote distractions, the visual distractions, the visual delight, and trying to make a point that is very, very poignant and very, and so you're able to sort of, when Dronacharya told Arjuna, look at the eye of the bird and nothing else. He didn't see the leaves, he didn't see the branches, he saw the bird, not even the bird, the eye of the bird. Minimalism in many ways is trying to get to the soul of the concept. You're stripping it of all its artificialities. You're taking out, you pick up something in a project and say, do I need this? And the answer is maybe. You take it out. You bring it down to a point where you can't take any more out, because then you'll be hitting the soul. So it's really about going to the soul of a space, and really it's less about the visual joy, it's less about what meets the eye, it's more about experience. It's more about this idea that you don't have anything extraneous, and you keep things down, you boil them down to the very basic and keep it down to the very essence of what it's supposed to be. On that note, I'm going to quickly share one of our projects. This is actually a very small project. This is our own studio in Bangalore. It's 700 square feet. When we started Studio Chintala, we said, let's design a space that actually represents our values, represents our philosophy, represents our design sensibilities and aesthetics, if you will. And so we decided to build something on our own. So we leased the roof of a retail building on a very major business streets, if you will, retail streets in Bangalore. And we decided to build something on our own. And essentially, we did this out of a kit of parts. So steel was sort of fabricated off-site, brought in, and it was bolted in place. And what we ended up with is, again, asking the same question. And I don't know if this is minimalist or not, but we asked the question, what is a studio? What is a design studio? Why are we designing this? What is the purpose? Why do we wake up every morning and come here? And what do you want to do? And the answer was clear. It's a space where people would come together, do amazing work, and, you know, a space that allows you to do what you're aspiring to do, and that's about it, right? So when we went about it, again, dispassionately, trying to not give it anything more than what the function required, we ended up with something like this. So again, it can be termed as very austere, very uninspiring. It may be boring, it may be stunning. That's besides the point. It really is a space where people can come each morning, work for hopefully 10, 12, 15 hours without getting fatigued, and go home at the end of the day. So for us, again, solving the problem, asking the question and saying, what is it that this space needs to do, really is the process, and nothing less or nothing more. So minimalism, I think, you know, I do believe that it's a very Indian concept. It is about trying to get rid of all the artificialities, and trying to go to the soul of a concept, a notion, an idea. And if you extrapolate that in an architectural sense, creating space that solves the problem is very fundamental. You know, something that's durable, of course, something that's easy to maintain, and that I think ends up in whatever you know, you want to call it, whether it's minimalism or something else. But now the question that you also asked, if the brief is about creating opulence, it's about, we have clients that say, you know, I have arrived, I have worked very hard all my life, and I don't think it's wrong for me to show the world that I have earned my place in this society, and I would like the building to speak of you know, my journey and the fact that I have arrived, and I want the building to be very glitzy and very ritzy and show a lot of glamour. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, it is purely an aspiration of a client. I can't morally judge that, and I can't say that, you know, you worked hard and you shouldn't be showing your opulence, you shouldn't show your wealth, really. I think that's fine. That becomes the brief, that becomes the problem. So how do you solve that? We did a project, I don't think it's part of this presentation, where the client said, you know, I want to show luxury, I want to show sort of a lot of opulence. And funnily enough, the project was as an amenity building for an IT campus. And we had to juxtapose both the client's aspiration of showing the opulence or luxury, if as it were, and also,
you're talking of the one in Hyderabad.
Yeah, it's called Elixir.
Yeah, Elixir, yeah.
Yeah. So what we did was we kind of and then we talked to IT employees, and they said, we want a cool building, we want something industrial, we want something funky, we want something raw, something. So here is a predicament. The client's asking for opulence and wealth and luxury and 5-star. He really always said, I want to be better than the hotel next door. And then here we have employees that we interviewed saying, we want something raw or something cool, something industrial, something. So we kind of, I feel like we've done a pretty decent job marrying these two notions. We've juxtaposed raw concrete exposed finishes with, you know, gold and bronze finishes, sort of stark contrast, but I think sort of it somehow manages to carry the day, where, you know, you juxtapose something very raw with something very luxurious, such as, you know, fabric that is rich velvet, also some very rich bronze and a lot of gold and a lot of glass. And then you have this very raw concrete that's very rudimentary. And so you can, I think as architects, we are not here to judge people's aspirations, because that is an entirely different sort of function. I think we fundamentally believe that whatever their aspirations are valid. That's a personal journey, and there is no absolute right or wrong in this cosmos. So we accept people for what they want, and if they want to show a lot of wealth and glitter and glamour, that becomes the brief. Of course, what we do ask is, can you please explain to us why? And what does that mean to you? Because that is where we believe, and you ask the question, what happens if it's not in alignment with your values? What we found, and it's shocking, my biggest apprehension, fear, and cynicism or skepticism about moving to India and starting a practice was, what if people didn't understand our ideas? We weren't able to communicate. And to be honest, and I'm telling you the honest truth, in the 6 years of practicing in India, there hasn't been a single client that has ever been at odds with us, or we have been with odds at them, because there was an aesthetic misalignment, or they didn't like what we proposed. And this is really heartening, because what saves the day is when you ask the client, and I'm going to try and show you a building, maybe which is actually a government building, somewhere here in Hyderabad, which is for the HMDA, and it's coming up here. Sorry. Yeah, here it is. So, we were given the brief. This is for Hyderabad Urban or Municipal Development Authority, HMDA. This is in Nanakramuguda. It was actually a government building. We didn't do the entire building, but we did the public spaces and the entire facade, of course, and the interiors for all the executive lounges and areas. But the brief was that it's a municipal building, and they wanted to create something that was really remarkable in its sort of visual appeal. And how do you do that and still keep the notion of a building that is really a government building? How do you create a place that that represents the organization, which is the Hyderabad Metropolitan Development Authority? How do you keep it timeless, if you will, and how do you make it still sophisticated? And what you don't see here, because the photographs are not very telling, is that it's actually bronze. So so I mean, again, the answer, clearly the brief was to make it very rich, not opulent, but definitely give it a stature of richness, if you will, sophistication. Actually, let me correct myself, not necessarily rich, but and so we chose to use bronze as a building, as a material for the facade, the skin, and still sort of keep it in a very restrained expression to enable it to have both characters, I believe. It may not be the most striking building, but upon sort of pondering and looking at it carefully, you realize that there is got that nice sheen to it, and it still sort of sits stately and without kind of screaming aloud, but at the same time, it's not something that you just kind of fades away into the background. So I think it's really about again, intentions. The idea here was to really only solve the brief and create a building that kind of solves both those challenges of trying to keep it both sophisticated as well as visually striking.
All right. Diwakar, you have designed a couple of schools. Now, when coming to the school design, kids' safety and security are a major, they play a major role, which has to be taken into account. I'm reminded of an incident in 2012, the tragic incident at Sandy Hook's Elementary School in the US, which had a gun shooting occur in the premises. And, in a span of just 12 minutes, 20 kids and 6 staff were gunned down. On analysis of the design of this premises, it was observed that it has a closed courtyard type of building design, which was situated very close to the entrance, lacking the visual connectivity between the entrance and the building, and also due to the lack of buffer zones, which allowed the intruders direct access into the building without any hindrances. After this incident, the school administration, in fact, took the decision to demolish this old building, and they built up a new one with safety and security of the students as the primary architectural factor here. The school was placed further away from the entrance and at a higher contour in the new design in order to limit visibility between the administration building and the approach ways. In fact, they have, for added security, a number of checkpoints and buffer zones were also added on. Even in the Indian context, we have seen students face several challenges within the school settings, like the physical abuse, violence, emotional and mental harassment. Recently, there was a case of an elite school in Hyderabad where a 4-year-old girl was sexually assaulted by a driver in the school premises repeatedly for 2 months. One might call it as a management responsibility, but we as architects should also resolve the social issue through our designs. So how do you ensure this eyes on street concept workable in schools? We do have the CCTV cameras, which actually serves later on as an interrogation device later. In fact, there was a survey done of school students, and it was found that these cameras gave them the impression, when the students were asked, how do you feel about these cameras? They said, because there is a camera here, we feel that means the space is not safe enough. So they gave an impression that they weren't safe in the campus. So through the building, we have even open areas, play a very big role. They function as pockets of self-directed informal learning. In your case, what has been your top priority while creating the outdoor areas for school buildings? And in what ways you have considered the safety and security issues? Moreover, our Indian designs are all to do with vibrant hues, and it is very colorful, which has a big role on the child psychology. How have you attempted to balance the colors and the neutrals in your design?
So there's a few questions there. Let me try and take the first one. I mean, I've actually never really thought about it so deeply as you've kind of alluded to it, about safety and design. I mean, safety, of course, you always think of code. You expect the code, the building code, the fire code, to take care of essential basic, life safety in a building. But some of the examples you cited, I mean, they're pretty scary about, what can happen in the built environment. And I really wonder, I mean, obviously, the answer is to try and eliminate spaces that are, I don't have an answer, actually. How do you prevent somebody from doing something so nasty to a little child? I don't know. In a building, it could have happened in a forest. It could have happened anywhere. I mean, do you blame the building? I don't know. But I think as an architect, that's your worst nightmare, right? I mean, if your building's beautiful, wonderful. If your building's won an award, okay. But if somebody's life was at risk because something you've done contributed to it, that's like, you can't ever reconcile with that. It would be the worst feeling for an architect to be responsible for somebody's well-being, or in this case, the opposite of well-being. So how do you, as an architect, the sort of the facilitator of the built environment, how do you really ensure that your users are safe? I mean, clearly, we follow every building code. They're there for a reason. I worked extensively in California, and California is very stringent, way beyond uniform building code, way beyond the American building code. California is one of the states with the most stringent building code. And, we try and follow that in all our projects, even in India. So fundamental life safety, I think, mostly is assured. It's mostly common sense. Building code is common sense. Now, as far as trying to create spaces, and I think the kids that answered the question about what do you feel about a camera, I think they're very right. If you know the book, Defensible Spaces, I think there's a certain notion about, the higher your walls, the higher your compound walls, the more crime. I mean, there's clear empirical proof, right? I mean, the whole book, Defensible Spaces, actually goes on to talk about that, about how the notion of security can actually impede on it. The more you try, the worse it gets. The more open you are, the less crime. If you are protecting a property, somebody thinks that there is something worth stealing. So people will jump the wall. If there was no wall, there's nothing to jump. That's not to say we open all our doors and live like, there's no issues with security. But I think as an architect, you can only do so much. But I think trying to be overly protective and putting fences with spikes on them and creating this really, I don't think really serves the purpose. I think like the kids narrated, that a CCTV camera means that there is something to be worried about. It creates a lot. I think, just good old simple rules of good passive design, open spaces that are not complicated. I would never be able to design a school that was complex. Schools are places where when we design schools, we again ask, what is a school? And we say it's a place of learning. And then we say, how can the design, the teachers are teaching, the books are teaching, the curriculum is teaching, then how does the building, the built environment aid in the teaching and the learning? And we say, what can that building be, and what are you trying to teach? If I can close my eyes as an adult and think of my school and say, that was a beautiful experience, not traumatic, not, when I think of school, if I'm not thinking of my homework and all the stress that exams caused, and I think about it as a beautiful experience in a built environment, I think I've done my job as an architect. So really about creating, and we believe, again, beautiful spaces don't have to be complex. So I'm trying to answer your question about how can security be addressed as a designer. I think keep it simple, make it extremely porous and extremely open. There are no nooks and areas that are sort of dangerous. But beyond that, I think you take care of the basic code and do it all with a good heart. And I think most of the things should sort of take care of themselves. I don't know if that answers the question, but I really struggle to find any better answer than that.
All right. Can we have a look at the school design?
So this one actually is a planetarium. And again, when we designed a planetarium, this is a very rural part of Karnataka. This is for the Karnataka Science and Technology Department. We asked students, so this is typically our process. We go to the users and spend a lot of time. We call it visioning. And so we said the planetarium was designed for school kids. The director of the Science and Technology Department wanted to eliminate superstition and bring scientific thinking to rural Karnataka. So school kids were the primary audience. And so we were asked to design this planetarium. So we went and asked a bunch of school kids to draw their notion of what a planetarium is. So we asked them to do sketches, and we had hundreds of such sketches. And essentially from that came attributes that we talked about. We kind of list these attributes very dispassionately. Oh, this is actually not a planetarium. This is a science museum, which also we did along with the planetarium. And essentially, we wanted to create a space that induced awe. This project is actually just taking off now. After COVID, it was on hold. We wanted to create a building that kids would come to and say, wow, science can do that, because in many ways, structural design is science. And so we designed a building that is awe-inspiring, where kids can come and see the power of science. And essentially, it's a large exhibition hall. The program is very straightforward. And we created this sort of, symbol that really represents the power of science. This one's the same program, as in same department, science and technology. Again, these are very low budget. This is actually a 3.5 crore rupee project. We're designing a planetarium for its town called Bagalkot, North Karnataka. Again, all the basic principles of evaporative cooling, a very hot kind of location. The planetarium is an 8-meter dome. We created a geodesic structure, and essentially were able to come up with this. And then some of the ideas, early concepts, there's a local red stone that we found really beautiful. And ultimately we tried to create something that was very planetary, if you will. It's one of, it kind of represents something that's very much in the realm of planets and satellites. And so we created this polycarbonate box, which essentially floats on a podium. And so that's the thinking. Now, we often, when we did a hospital, for example, this one's in Hyderabad, when we did a hospital, we say, who is the most important stakeholder? Of course, the owner of the hospital, who wants to either, serve community or make a profit, whatever the aspirations are, or it could be a combination of both. There are the doctors who want to practice their profession, but ultimately the real sort of most important, bless you, the most important stakeholder is the patient who comes there to be cured. So we said, when we design a hospital, we do an extensive profiling of a patient. We actually take a patient, give him or her a name, and start saying, what is it that this patient wants out of this hospital? And every move we make, essentially, we sort of remind ourselves that, would this work for the patient? Is this really helping the cause? And is it really helping the most important stakeholder, which is the patient? We talked about schools and how we try and focus on the students, the kids. Yes, they're the teachers. Yes, there's the principal. Yes, there are the support staff. Yes, there's the parents. All of them are stakeholders in a school, but ultimately it's about these little kids that really thrive and are to be nurtured in this building. So then we ask, what can the architecture do? What can the built environment do to sort of create that sort of environment for the kids to thrive? Here is a project we did. This is factory workers housing. This is just completed. We did this in Chittoor, Andhra Pradesh. This is for Amar Raja batteries, Amaron batteries. A lot of young people, mostly 18-year-olds, high school dropouts. They come from neighboring villages and they are offered training, and then they become factory workers. So we designed housing for them. And we said there are only two priorities here. One is, a lot of these kids are leaving home for the first time. They are really finding themselves. They have lived in the comfort of their parents' homes. They come from pretty impoverished communities and backgrounds. And so psychological well-being, they come into this space, all of a sudden they're meeting new people, they're living a new environment, they left their homes, their families. So we said psychological well-being, and it's a hot place, Chittoor. They don't have air conditioning. So how do you bring psychological comfort and thermal comfort? Two drivers, that's it. So we said, of course, there are all the other things about light and all the things you learn about good design. But we said, how can you keep these two themes and create a building that really addresses those? So, we did a lot of different things, but all passive. We created solar shading, perfect orientation, cross ventilation. We create these large breezeways that allow for ventilation. These fins allow for shading. We've done extensive shading analysis to ensure that the building performs from a thermal heat gain. We mitigated heat gain as much as possible. We literally ensured that at no point in the day or the month or the year the building was directly exposed to heat gain. And essentially, of course, then also the psychological well-being. So we said, how can we create spaces of interaction? How can we create places for kids to, or these young adults to run into each other and make bonds and relationships, and really create a home away from home, really, a building that really sort of allows them to, feel like they're at some sort of home away from home. So it's really about, these priorities. And, when we design these things, we try and kind of keep it very much, the aesthetics really is besides the point. The beauty is really besides the point. At very few points in the project did we say, oh, this looks beautiful, let's do this. We try very hard. Of course, we're not perfect. The ego creeps in, the cunning mind creeps in, and we try to throw in our sensibilities. But then at least we are aware enough to pull back and say, are we doing this really for ourselves? Are we solving the problem at hand? And we try and remind ourselves, and we're fairly good at trying to be honest about it. And so again, the buildings are not stunningly beautiful in the conventional sense, but we believe that they serve the purpose and they really have a experiential warmth about them. And that's the crusade. Actually, another example of that thinking, this is actually a bungalow, a farmhouse for a fairly wealthy person, 35,000 square feet. We convinced them that it shouldn't necessarily be about, showing off wealth. It's about definitely comfort and, sort of having a space that you can entertain guests and, really kind of allow to thrive as a family and interact with your friends and guests. And so essentially, it's a very simple plan. I mean, we haven't shot this for professionally, but the plan is very simple. There's one part of the house which is sleeping, the other part of the house which is living, and that's it. It's literally a bunch of spaces that represent that. This is also a very recent project we've done, very low budget, about 6 crores. We did this for the Telangana police in Yusufgura, Hyderabad. Just a pre-engineered building. It's a convention center. And this was our original idea, and a place for people to come and, thrive. Police people have their events, families come and have weddings. And essentially we created a PEB building with a loggia around, which essentially allows you to, one, shade the building, two, creates a very monumental space, which also can be used to have, dinners, and it functions as a pre-function space. So again, the ideas of trying to keep things extremely simple and just solve the problem.
Okay. Diwakar, how about the historical context of a place? Because every region has a distinctive history and associated landmarks. And is this information important while creating a new design? We have seen, architecture where an architect uses the historical context as a starting point for the modern design while also drawing inspiration from it. One such instance is, Christopher Benninger's Suzlon 1 campus in Pune, which was inspired by the famous historical locations like Fatehpur Sikri and the Meenakshi temple at Madurai. Here he has used the cluster form, the Deepastambha, which is the focal point and which can be seen from any location, which is also used to light the oil lamps. He has used, waterfall, which is reminiscent of the water bodies which were used in both this Fatehpur Sikri and the temple, which is typical, of the historical inspirations. This combines a modern perspective with a connection to the past through spatial arrangements. In your case, how significant has the historical context of a site been while developing the design concepts?
So, I mean, that's a very good question. And I do believe, I mean, how can you deny that history has its role and place in everything we do? I mean, in fact, from an architecture standpoint, I believe pretty much every problem has been solved. When you look at history, a lot of, buildings haven't evolved that much. Yes, we've thrown in technology. Yes, we have air conditioning. Yes, we have automation, and we have a whole bunch of different materials, but the fundamentals of architecture will never change and haven't changed, in thousands of years. So you can pretty much solve most problems, except like high-tech problems, by looking back at history. We look at history all the time. I can give you multiple examples of really amazing ideas that we were trying to answer, or problems we were trying to answer, and we found the answers in history. You have parking garages. I don't have the pictures here, but you have parking garages that are boring, sometimes scary, dark, dingy. And we kept looking at the step wells, the ones that you see in North India, which essentially are a whole series of stairs that lead you into something that's subterranean. And it occurred to us that you could open up parking garages very much like a step well. And then we created these in a couple of projects here in Bangalore. And it's like a brilliant thing that you can, there's no better example than being inspired by history for a very modern problem. So history definitely has, I think, most of the answers, if not all of the answers. So there's no question that you have to look back as much as possible. The cultural context plays a huge role. There's no question. But I think history and respecting history and paying homage to history shouldn't be confused by replicating history. There was a very lively debate going on in the group not too long back about the Secretariat. And I think respecting history does not mean replicating it. If we were respecting history, we would be building caves, because that's the first historic building that I can think of, right? Man first lived in caves. If respecting buildings means building architecture that represents temples or mosques that were built 200, 400 years back, then you're really not doing justice, because those buildings were the cutting edge buildings of that time, right? Those buildings were using technology to the ultimate sort of dimension. Those buildings were really about creating the best architecture that was made from the ideology and the material and the technologies that were available at that time. Now, we cannot sit here in 2023 and try to say I'm paying homage to Islamic architecture or Hindu architecture, and I'm going to design a Kakatiya style building because I am all about Kakatiya and I'm respecting history. Respecting history is an emotional thing. It doesn't have to be literal and visually represented. You can learn, like you said, from the ethos of a historic building, the way the courtyards are laid out or where the space is articulated, but you don't have to represent it visually. That's too shallow an expression, too shallow a homage to history. I think the best way you can respect history is to do the best you can with today's materials and today's ideologies and today's thought process. If somebody were to come from the future and look at a building that was built in 2023 and they look at it and think of it exactly like a building built 200 years back, then we've really not done justice. So I'm very clear that representing and replicating, I mean, it's nostalgia, right? It's about, oh, I'm creating a bungalow from the 1950s. I mean, that's all fine. It's like looking at an album of old photographs and getting all romantic about it. Really nice, very good nostalgia. But architecture has a bigger role than just creating nostalgia. Architecture has a bigger role than representing or something that's been already done. Architecture needs to solve the problems of today, and you can do it without disrespecting history. You have to create history with each building, not just become a mirror to the past. So that's where I stand. Definitely very clear about how history needs to be, what the place history has in today's sort of design and environment.
Any more slides you have, Diwakar?
I'll just end by sharing T-Works, because that's one of our latest projects. I'm gonna start by sharing a video. I hope, because I know it's a bandwidth thing and it's a pretty large file. This video is essentially documents T-Works for those of you who haven't seen it. Again, I by no means suggest that it's stunning. It's actually a little bit somber and maybe even eerie the way we shot it, but it's really trying to show the spaces. So with that. Anyway, that was T-Works, and obviously you all know that it's opened recently, and um, still a few things to be finished, but overall we are happy that working with the government is not for the faint-hearted, as I think a lot of people here would vouch for. Is very challenging, but it's also very rewarding. We found that it's actually quite quite conducive to good design. Sometimes because nobody cares, you can slip in some good stuff. Sometimes because they genuinely care. So it's an interesting experience.
Can we take a few questions from the participants?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there is one question with regards to the building in Suzhou, which you have done. The independent podium building essentially raised the building behind on stilts. How were the floors behind the podium, especially the lower floors, used?
So essentially what we've done is had the tower meet the ground, essentially. So there was no real stilt floor. Of course, there were 6 basement floors that were actually with mezzanines, so it's more than 6. But the building lobby, the tower lobby, as it were, actually meets the ground. So it opens up to the ground. The retail building, which is an 80-meter building, which is a high rise in its own right, was also an independent building. Connected, of course, the 2 buildings were connected with a bridge. But for the most part, the tower really, very unconventional for a tower to come straight and hit the ground. But that's what we did. So yes, there is a structural system that meets the ground, but that was essentially the ground floor public area as a lobby.
Okay, then there is a question that in the very first segment, you used the term prejudice when you addressed minimalism. Interestingly, the term prejudice is technically a bias, and even designers use as a method to ensure the product they are designing isn't affected by any one person's ideas or assumptions. Can you suggest where to draw the line on not taking in assumptions, because architecture is more an experiential product than a utilitarian one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think unfortunately the Americans are to be blamed a little bit, because they've turned architecture more into a visual sort of thing. But really, how many people interact with the building just purely visually? I mean, of course, if you're driving in a city, you see a high rise, you see it every day. It represents whatever it needs to. But the bulk of the people actually interact with the building by actually living in it, or working in it, or shopping in it, or watching a movie. So it's really about experience, and that's something we don't talk about that much. I think when you see an award, when you see a magazine and you see award-winning projects, it's usually the facade that makes it to the cover. It's seldom the spaces that, yes, you have to experience a space. Granted that 60% of our senses are really visual. So I do agree that what meets the eye is really important, but I think it's very hard to justify that the building is purely about what meets the eye. There's so much more to a building, and it's about how you feel when you live in it, when you interact with it on that intimate level. So I think when I say prejudice, of course, it's a loaded statement and I need to be careful, but it's really not about about one's own personal crusade. I believe art and architecture is very, very different. And when they say, oh, an architect is also an artist, I kind of beg to differ, because an artist has an idea. It could come out of pain, it could come out of joy, but they sit in the luxury of their own studio, bring a canvas and paint it, and then they put it out to the world. And if the world loves it, great. If they don't, fine. An architect has a much bigger responsibility. You are dealing with lives of people, and you can make or break a family, you can make or break an institution, you can make or break a city. So while art is a very integral part of architecture, it's only a subset of that. An architect has a much bigger responsibility, both social, so psychological. And so I think it's very important to strive to make buildings appeal to a universal audience. Even if it were a smaller project like a house, you need to make sure all the people in the house are happy with it, all the people in a school are happy with it. So there comes that demand for or need to make buildings quote unquote universally acceptable, universally beautiful. And that search for universal beauty is really where we said we can't make things beautiful by putting ourselves. So we remove ourselves, and the only way we can make them beautiful is like a baby. A baby is beautiful. Every baby is beautiful. It's because there's a certain honesty. They're not corrupt yet by the forces of the world. And so how can we create that beauty? And the only way I can do it at this point is to be aware that I am the problem. The architect is the problem. You look at things designed by product designers. They go to NID, they go to these amazing product design schools. You go to an electronic shop and you try to pick a stabilizer, and it's trying to do more than just a stabilizer. It's trying to really say, look at me. And then you ask an engineer to design a stabilizer. It's really honest. It's really simple. It's really not about it anymore. It's less about it and more about the function. And that's what we believe is really a space or a building that's devoid of prejudice, devoid of somebody's idiosyncratic sort of ideas.
Okay. People are talking about today bringing the green inside, which you have also done in the office design. So how do you do that with respect to a tall building? Is it too cumbersome to try and do that, especially with the mechanical systems involved and the large floor plates?
It's actually not very hard. In fact, we're working on an interesting project now. It's not a very tall building, but there's so many opportunities to bring, green into any type of building. In fact, the Pritzker Award awardee this year, David Chipperfield, finished a project in South Korea, where he brought in. It's a relatively tall building. It's probably 20 or 30 stories tall, but he brought in these large open spaces that are terraces with a lot of greenery. In fact, goes way beyond greenery. It's got water bodies and so on. So in a tall building, there's definitely an opportunity to do those, especially in a place like India, with such, moderate climate is really, even though it gets pretty hot, I think you can bring in a lot of nature into your tall building by creating these large open spaces. Now, from a real estate standpoint, we have to remember that they do not negate the leasable space, because we are able to sell. We've done an IT building where we put large terraces, and the client or the tenant paid for the space, because with Wi-Fi you can bring your laptop out, and if it's thermally comfortable, you can work in these spaces. So short of putting indoor plants and green walls, which is cliched and boring, you can actually create real green environments in tall buildings, short buildings, open buildings, closed buildings. I think there is a lot of opportunity, especially in a country like ours.
Okay, somebody is interested in knowing, when it comes to minimal and simple designs, how do you, with respect to the urban landscape, what are your solutions?
I'm guessing it means, I think it's interesting that our buildings are very eclectic. I think I see a certain earnestness when I see a house that is painted pink and red. It kind of puts a smile on my face, because it's the house owners sort of very earnest statement to the world, that I am flamboyant, that I am green and pink. So there's something, I mean, of course, when I was younger, I thought it was really cheesy. Now I actually see it with a different lens, and it feels so earnest and beautiful in its own way. So fundamentally, I think cities are meant to be eclectic. I do not think there should be uniformity, because buildings are representations of people's values. Buildings are manifestations of people's aspirations. And so as many aspirations as there are, so should the styles and physical manifestations. So cities should look complex. Cities don't have to look all the same. Not all buildings should be minimalist. Again, don't know what that means, but not all buildings should purely represent our values. I think there is space for a variety of ideologies, and buildings should represent different ideologies. So there's something beautiful about the chaos of eclecticism, chaos of variety. I think some cities go overboard, and like London, for example, they've been trying very hard to keep a certain style. There are cities like Santa Barbara in California that try to keep the mission style. Can understand why, but I think it's a little forced. So from an urban landscape standpoint, I think luckily, because there's so much chaos, the minimalist buildings will stand out for being unique, because every building is trying to scream, and there's one building that's not. So in a way, yeah, you get attention by being quiet, but I think there is definitely room for all varieties of expressions.
Okay. I'm just looking at the chats. Somebody wants to know what is the automation impact and construction and maintenance of buildings with respect to the future?
I think automation, we get 3 representatives, product vendors coming into our office every day for automation. I don't know what it is, but I think these are all bells and whistles. They're all sort of little add-ons to buildings, building management technology, lighting automation, and automating services, controlling temperature, thermal comfort. All of those are definitely wonderful advancements in technology that are really sort of taking the buildings to the next level. But I think you can never get away from the fact that buildings are fundamentally spaces where people live, and buildings are not about technology alone. I think technology is purely an add-on to embellish and to sometimes make buildings more comfortable. There's no denying that. But I think you need to get your basics still right. You cannot think of technology as a way to solve the fundamental blunders that we may make. So I think buildings must really be first designed from a passive standpoint. You do all your basics that they taught you in second and third year of architecture school about climatology and orientation and sun, heat gain, and all those. And automation and all those can really then complement those fundamental moves. But if you think that automation is going to solve all the problems and ignore the basics, I think then you're in big trouble.
All right. I think we are done for the evening. Thank you, Architect Diwakar Chintala, for sparing time.